People are expected to appear in the Kagiso Magistrate's court today in connection with crimes committed during the past week of looting in and around Soweto. The country was again shocked by looting of shops and eruptions of violence. The unrest started after a Somali shopkeeper allegedly shot dead a 14-year-old boy a week ago. The incident sparked a wave of what some are calling xenophobic attacks. Are they? Many are steering clear of labelling the unrest xenophobia, blaming lack of parenting, education and even good governance as the reasons behind the violence. Now, joining us today is Professor Chris Landsberg, Chair of African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg. Very good morning, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I would love to know how you view the eruption of what has happened in Soweto. It's easy to call it xenophobia if you want to label stuff, but it's much, much deeper than that, wouldn't you say?
Look, first of all, I think we're in denial on the issue about xenophobia, or let's call it more appropriately. I listened to some of the interviews this morning and over the weekend, and I'm glad to hear that people are now appropriating a concept that some of us have put out there. It's Afrophobia. It's actually hatred of black Africans from north of the Limpopo. They are the victims, and they've been the victims for the past decade. You know, Eben, it's very interesting. I mean, I listened to your excellent interview about this terrible spate of murders of women in Cape Town at the moment. It was an excellent interview. We can take every single word and phrase and question you've asked and replace rape and murder of women with xenophobia. So what's the issue here? South Africa is on the brink of a very serious social crisis. But it doesn't mean that xenophobia is not an element of that social social crisis and social violence. I think that is those are the two issues. So it's not an either or. It's not good governance, lack of services versus xenophobia. It's both, but I don't think we should be in denial about the fact that it's black Africans that are being targeted.
No, it's easy for all of us to pigeonhole stuff and put things in a box because I think that makes us all sleep a little bit better at night. But what about issues that tie in with that? You talk about the crisis we're having as a country. What about the parenting that I touched on? What about the drugs amongst youth? If you see it's 14, 15-year-old kids that are being put in the back of that police van there that's going in. Surely that's not because there's a lack of opportunity or because there's unemployment. That's criminality and a scenario where kids are allowed to roam the streets freely by their parents.
At the risk of sounding contradictory here, it is criminality, but I don't think we should criminalize the criminals. Remember what I'm saying to you. If you have communities, typically black communities, where you have unemployment rates of 60%, 40%, people loitering around all day, these things are playing themselves out, gangsterism, drug abuse, abuse of women, rape. And let's just take, for example, that interesting tweet about those guys from the SABC and Klappe. Yeah. You know what that's symptomatic of? We have a culture of violence to resort problems in our society. Yeah. And this stems from how we try to undo an old system. But I agree with you. Parenting and all these are issues. But I'm saying again to you, Eben, for me, it's not elections on time. It's not a democratic crisis. That's not what South Africa should really worry about. Yeah. There is a social crisis of education, of unemployment, and so on. But let me now just pose one typical question out there related to xenophobia. How can you accuse foreigners of stealing something that doesn't exist? Yes. They're accused of stealing jobs. They're creating jobs and job opportunities in Soweto and elsewhere, yet they become the victims.
You talk about this Afrophobia that's at the heart of the problem. How do we then come to terms with this as South Africa? Because it's something that we at some point have to collectively come to terms with and deal with. Because, as you say, we're reaching a tipping point.
What I like about your question is that the collectivism. There are many issues we haven't dealt with in this country. Let me throw out something there that comes out from ironically, some African colleagues and friends of mine. They say they come from poorer African countries, but their societies are much more tranquil. I love Tanzania and I love going to Tanzania. I can tell you Tanzania doesn't experience the kind of social ills and violence that we, yet it's a much poorer country. Now, you know what they say? Not only is there a need for collective responsibility, but this entire society of ours needs to go for psychiatric treatment. We haven't dealt with our problems of the past. That's why there's this resort to violence. Let me just throw in another spin in the works here. Here is a country claiming to be a leader in Africa, or at least having some leadership aspirations in Africa.
Yeah.
If you can't point to a constituency in Africa to support your African aspirations, in fact, you are targeting people from other African countries. I want to make a dire prediction for you and say to you, it's only a matter of time that we might see a backlash against South Africans in other African countries for the way we treat their people in our own society.
That was the question I wanted to ask you, but let me even go further back there and talk about, you talk about the problem that we're having collectively. What about that sense of entitlement that always seemed to simmer here in South Africa, that we must get stuff because we are South Africa, we need to get X? Do we have that problem of entitlement, and is this part of that underlying mental problem that we have?
Look, I mean, I certainly don't know how 49 million people think. So I don't know whether 49 million people suffer from a sense of entitlement. But what I can say to you, and again, let me borrow from that excellent interview you had earlier. The interview ended by saying, where is that grand plan that government spoke about during the 16 days of violence? I'm saying to you that it was an African report, the 2006 African peer review mechanism, which was so closely associated with the Mbeki government in South Africa, that warned in 2006, as it did in 2006, about the violence associated with the Kenya elections, that Kenya, which led to the current president facing an ICC indictment. But they warned about xenophobia in this country. You know what we chose to do? In part because it came from Africa. If it came from the United Nations Security Council or the World Bank and the IMF, maybe we would have listened a bit more. I returned the blind eye. But I want to say to you, I can't speak for whether there's a sense of entitlement. What I can say to you, I don't think there's enough proactiveness on the part of government to admit that there's an Afrophobia problem, not caused by them, by the way. I mean, I'm still saying to you, I'm relating this thing that I know people can say to me, here's another man that blames everything on apartheid. I think apartheid has messed us up so much, even that there was a hierarchy of races, okay? So one race is the top. As long as you feel you're on top of somebody else, so in other words, as long as we blacks feel that we are better than other blacks, who sometimes are lighter in pigmentation, but just because they wear a certain garment, we target them. And I just leave you with a sad anecdote. In a community that I lived for more than 10 years, very popular community here in Johannesburg, it was very common to see police stop dark-skinned people who appear to be from West Africa on a Sunday morning, but they just don't stop white people. Have you heard of Chinese shops being targeted en masse? Chinese are also victims of crime, like we South Africans are victims of crime. Whites are victims of crime, just like all of us are victims of crime. But that there's a concerted attack against a community from north of the Limpopo, with Africa. That's a form not only of Afrophobia, but of self-hate. You hate yourself so much, it's so instilled in you, that you don't realize by attacking that black person, you're actually attacking your own persona.
I think the collective thing we have to do is try and get therapy individually. Professor, thank you for joining us. We could carry on with this conversation for the rest of the show. Hopefully we will continue having discussions with you around these issues in the weeks and months to come, because I think you're right, we are reaching a tipping point, and it's something that we have to deal with collectively. It's not government, it's not the media, it's everybody that needs to try and get their heads around it, and hopefully we can take it into the family home.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor.